It's 11 o'clock, so we will continue with the tooling event. Good morning on behalf of Solventa and good morning on behalf of Orbus. Welcome at the third presentation of our tooling event. For those who are not familiar with the concept or for those who have just joined us, every 2 years we host an event where we provide a platform to a selection of suppliers. And those suppliers are listed in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for EA tools. This year we welcome 7 suppliers of EA tools who will demonstrate the added value of their tooling. This third presentation is from Orbus. They also joined us 2 years ago in live. And of course now they will give the presentations from the comfort of their own home. We hope to welcome them again in 2 years and then in real. Questions can be asked through the Q&A in the top of your screen. Some presenters will answer the questions directly. Others will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. The presentation will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. And I would now like to give the floor to Paul and Will from Orbus.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jan, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be back with Solventa and taking part in today's showcase. I'm just going to share my content, if that is okay. And hopefully, people will now be able to see a screen with Orbus software in the center and application portfolio management with iServer 365. Is that correct? Perfect. I see a thumbs up. That's good. Okay. So by way of introduction, then, from Orbus's side today, we have myself, Paul Clayton, who will be leading you through the presentation and indeed a bit of an overview to our core product, iServer 365, focusing on the use case of application portfolio management and indeed how certain things such as application rationalization and cost savings can be gained on the back of this. I've been with Orbus Software for about 5-6 years now in a range of different roles, but today I'm here in my capacity as one of our product specialists. So we'll hopefully be able to answer any of the technical questions that you have during the session. I'm joined as well by my colleague William. I'll let William introduce himself in a moment, but he'll also be available through the chat feature. So any questions that you have maybe as we're going along, he might also be able to answer those there.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for having us. As Paul said, I'm the internal sales manager here at Orbus Software, heading up the EMEA region. I will be on hand to answer any questions that you have on the Q&A section, and at the end, if we need to, we can pass those back through to Paul to give a live overview. Thanks very much. Look forward to seeing your questions.
Sounds good. Thanks, Will. Okay, in terms of how we'll break down our session to hopefully provide you with the most information about sort of who we are and where our product can potentially be of benefit to you in today's session. We'll start with a little bit of background on Orbus. I realize some of you were maybe not part of the session 2 years ago. Some of you maybe haven't come across us as an EA vendor in the past. So yeah, we'll set the scene a little bit, provide a little bit of context. Then we'll talk a little bit about what our customers are actually achieving through the tool with particular reference to the application management. And then once we've discussed the theory, we'll actually see it within a live instance of the iServer 365 product. And it's really the demonstration and the real world use cases that will take up the majority of today's session, hopefully leaving around about 10 minutes or so left at the end to cover any questions or to answer anything additional which we haven't gone through. If we don't have time to go through all of the questions, not an issue. The team from Solventa will of course pass on our contact details. We can either set up a direct one-to-one session, or of course can come back over email to any of those. Okay, so by way of background then, ORBUS Software as a company has been around since 2004. We're headquartered out of London in the UK, but very much with a global presence, supporting customers on the ground now in 67 different countries. A large end user base for our products, a large certified end user base as well, as we provide an e-learning course after initial training for all of our customers. This is provided free of charge for those individuals, of course, who maybe want to become experts in the product here. It's deployed across all regions, all vertical types, all sizes of organizations. Just to give you a sort of selection of some of our reference customers here, and really do vary. And the reason for this is because regardless of organization type, regardless of organization size, we tend to see some reoccurring themes within the market. People are, by general, trying to solve the same sorts of problems. So our tool is flexible enough to actually deal with these. Crucially, we take a slightly different approach to the other vendors that you'll actually see presenting today. So our approach is cloud first, but it's also Microsoft first. So we have uniquely built a web-based enterprise architecture tool that is sitting on top of the Microsoft Office 365 suite, using Microsoft SharePoint Online as the document repository, but with an integrated web app providing you with all of the benefits of an object-driven EA tool. Now, the reason for this is because we wanted to get away from this sort of classic representation of an enterprise architecture tool being for a specific enterprise architecture team, and content really just existing within that small world. We saw EA as a benefit to the business as a whole, so it made sense to us for the business as a whole to be able to get involved in the enterprise architecture practice. Now, how do you go about doing this? You could invest a large amount of time in training the organization to use possibly quite technical architecture interfaces, or you could do the other side of things, and the approach that we've taken, which is to use pre-existing Office tools, to integrate with SharePoint, to integrate with Power BI, to integrate with Teams, applications that are already familiar to the wider business, and thus actually allowing them to get involved in the value that we're creating and ultimately the EA content that's being driven out of the tool here. Now, this kind of summarizes some of the most popular integration points for ISO 365. It's by no means exhaustive. There are, of course, other solutions and other third-party products that we can integrate with, but hopefully this provides you with a bit of an insight into how truly adaptive this is and how we're really looking at this as our central data source moving forwards, whether that's feeding in from other tools, whether that's actually managing your documents and diagrams here, or actually using this as the source for analytics and for wider business use here. Okay, so a couple of the themes. We've just sort of reached the end of our sort of product roadmap season, if you like. So our customer teams have been reaching out to our existing customers. They've been asking them, you know, things like what their current thoughts are on the future for the industry, what their current challenges are at the moment, and also what they've been able to achieve through using our products thus far. So we've drawn a couple of these common themes in order to sort of set the context for today's demonstration. And this is kind of the overarching approach that we've had so far. So within this space, organizations are telling us they need to become digitally transformed entities, but while remaining control of their estate in order to adapt to what they see as the sort of new normal which is coming down the line. Now, of course, this has perhaps been accelerated by the last year of remote working and really seeing that this is going to continue beyond the sort of COVID pandemic. But I think we were always heading in this type of direction anyway. You know, organizations have had to accept that they are going to be working within multi-cloud environments, that if they're using, software as a service products, they may not be looking after those applications directly, they may not be looking after those landscapes directly, but in order to be compliant with data regulations, with national laws, they need to actually understand their external as well as internal environment. An interesting one as well has also been cost analysis as part of the EA team here. So being able to actually design for the future, not just fixing today's problems, but understanding if we have to upgrade an application 12 months down the line, if we are installing something for maybe a 3-year period, something is coming to end of life, what is the total cost of that life cycle going to be? Are we creating something that's going to be very complex in terms of its integrations, and is that going to cost us more further down the line? So designing for the future is a common talking point here. And then finally, the sort of approach of shadow IT. So understanding the applications that we haven't rolled out, that we don't actually know about. Particularly in a remote working world, this line can be quite blurred. So the perfect example is maybe the Teams session that we're on today. Microsoft Teams is also our corporate standard. However, I wonder how many individuals, if they were using WebEx or Google Hangouts or something like this, simply had to download another conferencing tool in order to take part in a meeting. And of course, this is all done without the sort of standard impact, standard assessments that would happen within the core IT team. So ultimately, the sorts of questions that we're answering, these kind of link back to what we've just been talking about. So cost reduction. How do we identify which applications are duplicates within our environment? Which applications are supporting the same business function or business capability? Complexity reduction. So are we integrating, are we creating new applications into our landscape that are going to actually cause us problems in the future? Security management, do we understand where applications are actually running? Do we have any security concerns where individuals are maybe unilaterally installing add-ons or new applications that we're not aware of centrally? And then obviously service improvement. What is the end user experience for our customers, both internal and potentially external? Could we potentially actually optimize our estate to actually meet these sort of goals? Now, a few examples of organizations that we currently work with who have actually been able to tangibly achieve these sorts of things. Kellogg's, we've now been working with for some time. They were kind enough to actually provide us with a written case study to say that they tangibly achieved a 14% reduction in total number of applications just within 6 months of adopting our platform. This translated into a 10% budget saving against this, vastly proving the sort of return on investment for the initial software cost here. Slightly more recently, Transport for New South Wales is a sort of pseudo-government department that looks after various different agencies for metro, ferries, business services, and so on in Australia. They adopted iServer 365, which we'll see today, specifically within the application rationalization use case. They saw each of their individual agencies reinventing the wheel, each having their own CRM system, each having their own financing system, and so on. So they wanted to rationalize this to one central portfolio for their department, allowing then each of the individual agencies to gain success for this. iServer 365 was evaluated and selected, and this is the project that's actually ongoing at the moment here. Okay, so I think at this point it's probably a good idea to get into the product itself and to actually see some of the things that we've just been discussing in action. So today's demonstration will follow a fairly standard approach. We'll start by actually looking at the object-based design, the web app for designing and managing our portfolio here. Then we'll move to more classic content creation. So creating our architecture diagrams, understanding our architecture landscape and creating these viewpoints for the wider organization, before looking at how we can actually share this with our business stakeholders. So how do we actually publish this content? How do we allow people to step back and maybe do some advanced analytics around our portfolios? So this will really be the sort of approach that we'll take today. I'm just going to close the presentation here. And hopefully everyone can still see my screen, and I've done this correctly here. Yep, we got another thumbs up, all good. So what you should be looking at here is a standard SharePoint site where we have effectively created a couple of sort of hero icons here to help us navigate through the various different moving parts of our EA platform. Now, as I mentioned, we will start today within the web app, the object-based repository. So we'll actually look at launching iServer 365 itself, which will bring us to this particular view of the tool here. Now, within the iServer 365 web app, we've tried to keep everything as simple and as straightforward for the end users to actually use. So, for example, we have our relative model areas where we can ring fence architectural content, looking at either maybe standard baseline or target areas, or indeed ring fence areas for training and sandboxed landscapes. We can also toggle on and off different areas of the meta model. So let's say maybe a particular user is only working within core components that you want aligned to the Archimate terminology, the Archimate look and feel. You can actually toggle off areas of the meta model here, potentially actually governing that directly by their user profile so that their view of the world is a little bit more simplified here. And you're not stressing them with sort of any wider complexity to what they're actually designing. In terms of the object-based management here, there are various different types of views that we can create in order to really look at our different portfolios. So today we'll of course be leaning towards an application focus. So here we can see a simple list view that we've created of the applications that are currently running within our training model. We've also filtered some of the attributes that are available here and applied some conditional formatting, particularly against the technical and business fit scores here, so as to easily identify applications that are not delivering us value. And you know, things here which are maybe a poor score in both of these fields could be candidates for looking at removing from our environment here. Now, these technical and business fit scores are usually calculated through multiple different variables. They're not usually just implemented straight into the tool here. So this is where we can start to lean on the Office 365 integration. So you can actually send out Microsoft forms that have been created, again, just with the standard Office functionality, out to individual users. That allows them to actually complete the surveys. In this case, it's following Gartner's time assessment for working out business and technical fit. And then as they submit this, it will automatically update the field back within the iServer 365 web app here. Now, you know, potentially you don't want to send someone a link directly to this. Maybe you want to embed this survey within a SharePoint site, or maybe you want to send it as a direct message to someone within Microsoft Teams. Now, of course, Solventa have kindly let us use their Teams platform for the purpose of today's live event, so we can't show you the live integration with that, but I have prepared just a very quick screenshot of what this would look like. So the application assessment actually embedded either to a direct end user or to a particular channel here, linking back to the web app so you can select from your application portfolio list and then conduct exactly the same assessment here. Okay, so let's imagine we've conducted these sorts of assessments. Let's actually look at, well, okay, we're not implementing an application from an external source today. We want to actually create one directly within the web app. So let's maybe call this Solventa live event app. And we can see we've got a couple of sort of standard attributes that are available out of the box. These are, of course, customizable. You don't have to stick to the ones that we provide. This is just a sort of suggested starting point here. So we'll just save this into our landscape. And we can see we've created version 1 here. So, of course, full version history, both at an object and document and diagram level. This is existing within our training environment, and we can see a little bit of additional information about this. Now, this application we have decided is going to be implemented into our landscape as part of our enterprise architecture project. So we want to link this to our project object. That is sitting within our environment, and we can search through for our project, which already exists. I imported this from Microsoft Project earlier on today, and we can see the initial relationship that's been created within the web app. Now, once we've got one relationship here, we can move away from this sort of list view, and we can move towards more of a dynamic visualization of our content. So this is a sort of simple link that we've created. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that are going on within this project as well. So we can expand that out to see what else is happening. We can see this project is supporting our enterprise architecture capability. We can see it's being influenced by the addition of iServer 365. It's also going to be impacting our Tableau business intelligence tool and our ServiceNow CMDB. If we want to expand this out further, we can then see where this is being hosted. So in this case, in our Barcelona data center, and we can see everything else which is now also existing within this. Now, once we have a bit of a sort of dynamic view of our landscape that's been created, we can also start to edit this directly from here. So we can choose to edit the visualization. We can either select a particular component, sort of move this about, and of course add in the additional relationships in the same way as we did a moment ago. Or we actually have the ability to create relationships simply by drawing lines between these individual components and then selecting from available relationships within the meta model to say, well, okay, this is an association relationship. This is something that is related to that, depending, of course, what is allowed and what is defined by the iServer 365 administrator here. Now, the end goal for all of this should be to create an integrated landscape where we can take a step back, maybe apply a few filters on these sorts of visualizations, and really see what is influencing what here. So if we move to one which I created earlier, where we've applied a couple of filters here just to look at the applications that are impacting or supporting certain business capabilities, in this case, just within a particular department of our organization. We can see our visualization. We also have the ability, of course, to search through these. So if we said, okay, I want to see where our IBM application is sitting, it'll zoom in straight away. It'll also highlight any relationships that are being affected by this. So we can see this is linking back to our ATM capability here. If we were to search for that instead, course, it's now selecting this and it's highlighting all of the relationships that are available out from this. So again, it gives us a little bit of a view on where there might be duplication in our landscape, where we might have multiple applications potentially supporting the same business capability here. And we'll actually come back to this view a little bit later on when we look at sharing this sort of window into our landscape with the wider organization. There is, however, two additional types of object-based view for those which we maybe want to apply some additional filters beyond simply the basic ones that we have here. And the first type here is a traceability view. So now looking across our landscape where we filtered our technology catalog by those components which are going to be out of support within the next 6 months. Where we could say, okay, well, what is this still affecting? Are there any applications we need to be aware of that are still in some way being affected by this technology? In this example, we can see there are actually 4, and we can roll this up further to say, well, okay, are these business critical applications? Are they affecting capabilities here that are particularly critical within our landscape? And again, by selecting the individual components, so in this case our warehouse management capability, we can see the associated attributes, and we can see that this is business critical. This is something that is revenue generating for our organization. So we need to be aware that there is a potential risk here, because this application is soon going to be affected in some way by an out of support technology component. This allows us to then plan for the future. It also allows us to do more direct impact analysis on these particular components. The final type of view that is also available from this is a simple sort of matrix view. This is quite useful for looking at relationships across an entire portfolio. So looking at, for example, all of the technology components that are supporting particular applications here, and actually being able to manage the relationships and the integrations directly from here. Okay, so far we've been looking particularly at the iServer 365 web app and the sort of object-based management of content. Of course, there are going to be situations where we want to create more static diagrammatical viewpoints. And so for this, we have true integration with Microsoft Visio. So if we launch Visio diagram that I sort of created earlier on here, we can see we haven't taken anything away from Visio. We've simply added in this iServer 365 plugin. So what that allows this modeling interface to do is speak to the live object repository, and also to have this document as a live example sitting on SharePoint Online. Now, all of our templates come with a bit of an overview as to what you can create. However, 9 times out of 10, the first thing we'll just do is maybe delete the example to make some space on the canvas here. And then we can start going about creating some content. If we want to drag and drop something from the stencil on the left-hand side, we can see our dynamic actions panel on the right here is going to react to it, because we've created an application which has no name. So it's prompting us, of course, to enter the shape text here. If we were to call this maybe Solventa Live App 2, something like this, we can see this traffic light has now moved to more of a gray approach here, which is just reminding us that we still need to save this back to the repository. We don't have an urgent action that we need to do here. Now, all of the shapes that we create are polymorphic in nature, so we can, of course, adapt the look and feel to these to any particular view that you might want to create as an end user. That's the beauty of using Visio as the front end for these sort of diagrams. Now, that is, of course, if you're creating new components. However, in most cases, you probably won't want to allow the end user to create new applications from this interface. We have that central repository for a reason. You want people to manage things within that and then simply reuse on these particular diagrams. So for that, we will bring up our Model Explorer. We can filter by type here, and of course we'll see only the object types that are allowed on this particular viewpoint. We could look into our application catalog here, and we could select maybe the Solventa application that we created a little bit earlier on in today's session. We can see some of the attributes that I also tagged have come through here as well. Now we can select how this actually looks and feels, depending of course on the type. So in this case we've just got the one viewpoint. However, if we drag and drop that onto the diagram, we can see that's now being reused from the repository. We know this because as we've selected this, we can bring up all of its related attributes here, and we can also see if there are allowed related objects to this. Now there won't be, as we've just created that one to our project, which isn't something we're allowed to model here. But if we created relationships to other applications, we could of course reuse that here, and it would automatically join up the connectors if we opted for that. Now all of this is being governed by the meta model rules, which are defined at a template level. So the end user really has a large amount of guidance in terms of what they're creating and what they're allowed to diagram here. If we were to maybe let's reuse one of our locations. Let's maybe take our Barcelona data center as an example. And maybe, oh yeah, we have a local one as well. Let's reuse this. We now have multiple ways to actually create the relationships between these. So we could use those on the stencil, that's fine. Or we could just use the connector feature within Visio. And our dynamic actions panel again will start waking up, and it will start telling us the sorts of relationships that we can create. Once these are committed, these are of course now existing back within that central web app itself here. And there's a little bit more information about what's actually happening. Everything that's being modeled on this particular diagram is being tracked within our history log here. So you can really see the steps, or even more so if this is a pre-existing diagram, the changes that are being made prior to the next version actually being saved back to the repository here. Now, in terms of how that sort of save occurs, we don't need to check anything back in here. We don't need a sort of separate action as this itself is sitting on SharePoint Online. All we need to do is hit save, exactly the same as we would with a normal Visio, and it will save it back to the sort of document library that we have on the SharePoint side of things. Now, this is probably a good point then to move back to SharePoint and actually see how the wider organization would consume the sorts of things that we're building here. So if we come back to the original page that we started with, there are really two different types of ways in which the end organization can consume this content. We'll start with a more classic approach with our document library, and then we'll move on to more of a use case based approach where we'll again look at the application rationalization use case. Within our document library, if we open this up, we can see I've also aligned the diagrams that I've been creating to use cases. However, of course, you could adopt a more classic approach such as alignment to the TOGAF ADM or to the sort of value stream phases within IT for IT or so on here. If we go into the same type of diagram as we were just working on, but one that I sort of finished off earlier on, we can see a crucial difference that is occurring versus a sort of standard Visio, because a standard Visio diagram is two-dimensional. It is really just a pictorial reference of what is going on in the organization, and it delivers us very limited value. Creating this with iServer 365 adds a third dimension to it. We can see each of the Visio shapes now existing at an object level within our web app. That means if we were to select one of these, we've not only got sort of full insight into all of the metadata that we're creating, but we've also got full insight into where this sits in terms of the wider environment. So we can see, although it's only got a few relationships on this diagram, this application is actually processing 4 different types of data. We can see it is helping support our health capability. We can see what technologies it's also sitting on, and we can see a process that it's actually being used by. So we really get a true picture on everything that's going on with this component outside of just this one view that we have created here. The end users interacting with this can of course leave feedback, and we can start a discussion going either against individual components or just against the diagram as a whole here. Govern this based on sort of who is allowed to create what and their end user profiles, of course. Okay, so let's go back maybe to our SharePoint landing page, and let's instead now look at the navigation through use cases. Now, these are really just SharePoint sites, so you have an almost limitless amount of potential with customizing these and branding them to your organization's look and feel. Today we'll be focusing in on the application rationalization use case. And as you can probably tell, I'm not the most creative of people, so I'm just using the sort of default styling here. We can see links to our diagrams again, but we're more interested in our live views of our landscape. So we're going to drill down to the application assessment area, and we can actually now see a live window back into our iServer 365 web app. We can see that particular visualization that we were actually looking at earlier on in today's demonstration. We can conduct the same sort of searches, actually drawing us in to these individual components, exactly the same as we were looking at within the object-based web app. Now that we've actually selected this, we can start to see its associated relationships and its associated metadata here. If we were to select something, maybe not on the visualization side, but within our sort of catalog, we can once again see the equivalent actually being represented out here. And this link is live, so any changes that are happening within the web app are going to be represented to the wider organization as soon as they're actually checked in, as soon as they're published here. Now, as I mentioned before, this is really just a SharePoint site. So if I actually go to edit this, and we go to maybe look to create a new component within here, we can see the web parts for iServer 365, but we can of course also see all of the other Office 365 functionality that we have here. You know, the ability to embed other components, the ability to look at images here, the ability to embed Microsoft Web Forms, to embed YouTube videos, or indeed maybe various dashboards with Microsoft Power BI. And this adds in almost an additional dimension to it all. So if we imagine we're now using the iServer 365 repository as a data source, we have the ability to actually run certain types of dashboards off that data. Now, we actually have a large amount of pre-built dashboard packs that we can offer within Microsoft Power BI. However, of course, if you had a different business intelligence solution in-house that you wanted to link the tool up to, there's nothing stopping you from doing that as well and creating your own dashboards to actually link to the data. One pack is actually focused in specifically around the application rationalization use case, and this is actually one of the most popular that we find here. So to look into this in a little bit more detail, we could say, well, okay, maybe we wanted to look at our application portfolio by cost here. And we can immediately identify we have 20% of our total application cost being sort of held up within the phasing out period of the life cycle. A lot of this is actually through getting rid of our fourth most expensive application here, but we could also see a split across our different categories of where we're actually saving the most money. So we had identified that we had multiple CRM systems running. Again, this is where we've actually been able to save the most cost by moving towards one corporate standard. Slightly different way of doing this could be looking at more of a value-based approach. So this again is coming back to those technical and business fit scores that we collected through those Microsoft Forms assessments right back at the beginning of today's session. We can filter based on capability, so we could say, well, okay, let's just look at applications that are supporting our customer experience capability. We can see on this quadrant that those in the bottom left-hand corner are really not delivering us the sort of value that we wanted. You know, these are a particularly poor technical and business fit here. We can hover over them to see the sort of additional attributes. We can also, of course, see the cost denoted by the size of the circle. We can then drill down into this a step further. So we can say, well, okay, we've identified this as a potential application we want to get rid of. Now we want to actually look at why is this costing us so much? How long will it be within our environment for? Can we perhaps decommission it a little bit earlier here? So we can see some core attributes, and immediately we can see, well, okay, this is an on-premise application that is sitting within Hong Kong, where data center space is incredibly expensive. So perhaps this is something that is actually influencing our cost here. And we're just about getting to the phase where we want to make this application live. You know, is it going to really deliver the value that we want it to? It's got a very long phase out period here as well. Now that we have visibility into all of this information, we can start to say, well, okay, are we making the correct decisions around this? Is there another application that exists within our landscape that could potentially do a lot of the work that this does for a sort of lower cost here? And it really does come back to that visibility. Once we know where cost is going, once we know those things that are duplicated or not delivering us value, then we have the ability to actually act on that. Now, I won't go into all of these sort of dashboards here, just in the interest of time, but I will simply point out we do have about 10 use case based dashboard packs and then a variety of different visualizations that are really influenced by things our own customers want to see represented within the tool. So covering all domains and not simply the application area alone, and also covering some core use cases such as what's succeeding what within our landscape here. Particularly on the roadmap management side of things, I think one of the most useful, coming back to that traceability view that we saw earlier again, is vendor lifecycle management and gap analysis. So this particular report will actually find the gaps in your landscape for you. So if we just filter maybe based on this, we can see this particular component is going to be out of support by the vendor before it's actually out of support internally here. So this of course represents a risk for our organization. It's something that we need to focus our effort in on here. In terms of the metadata, in terms of the lifecycle information, this can of course be populated directly into the tool. It could be populated through Microsoft Forms being sent out, or if you have a subscription to Flexera's Technopedia, for example, we can of course pull in that lifecycle information from there as well. So multiple different ways of actually populating the data behind here. Now, in the interest of time, I will sort of pause on the demonstration side of things here. I'll just sort of sum up a couple of sort of core themes that we've sort of spoken about and sort of recommendations for direction before we maybe see if there's been any questions that have been posted within the chat box here. So in summary, if I just bring this up. In summary, from what the organizations we're speaking with are telling us, a digital map will be required in the future. It's just a matter of time. complexity is continuing to grow. We need to have a digital map of our organization in order to actually react to this. We're also suggesting people to start small. Use familiar Microsoft products that the business is already familiar with. It's the best chance of end user adoption. It's the best chance of actually getting the wider organization involved in populating the content here. And define a particular use case. Application rationalization is a very popular one because it leads to some quite tangible returns being seen here. And then use a proven repository-based tool such as iServer 365, of course, to ensure that this success is actually achieved here. Okay, so at this point then, I'm just going to check in with my colleague, and I'm going to bring up the sort of Teams window here to see if there has been any questions that have been listed. No, I don't think there's anything.
We do have a few questions.
I'm looking somewhere else then. Q&A is a different tab.
That's the one. Perfect.
Okay,
So
let's have a look.
On the new tab, the first question came in at 10:17. There's a question for yourself to cover.
Yep, so the first one was for a Dutch government organisation, I introduced principles such as security by design, privacy by design, archiving by design. How do you implement these principles in architecture, design patterns, services, and so on? So I'm not sure if I understand the direction. If you're talking about each of these principles being sort of mapped back to a particular approach within the tool, the easiest way to do that would be to define an area within the meta model that sort of tick the boxes for the use case. So if it was, let's say, privacy by design, you might want to use the area within our meta model that is aligned to GDPR compliance. Then, of course, it's about defining the governance against the templates that you want the end user to create. So it may be extending an existing template. So it may be saying, well, we now want to represent which applications and which data are being used on a particular BPMN process diagram. Or it could be something completely within that use case. So it could be something like a data lineage diagram that you have within Visio, simply mapped back to the objects that are within the meta model. So in terms of design patterns, in terms of sort of design services, there's no limitation provided by the tool, either in terms of meta model extension or in terms of the types of templates you can create. It's simply about working out what needs to be done, what you want to achieve, and then sort of mapping it back there. We've recently built out a few standards for a Dutch university that is adopting HORA as their sort of architecture standard, which I believe is an adaptation of the Dutch government's approach. So I believe the approach we would take would also be quite similar to that. Okay, are there any actions required when you introduce a third-party stencil in Visio in order to make the data available through the plugin? Do you need anything in the meta model? So yes, there are one or two actions that are required. Effectively, you would need to do a mapping exercise. So you would need to, first of all, load up the Visio stencil against a template within our meta model here. And we can see there's a huge number that we can provide out of the box, but of course you can load up custom ones as well. And then at a object level, you would simply have to say this object within the stencil maps to this object within the meta model. Now that could be a pre-existing object. So of course you could have the same object visualized in lots of different ways on lots of different Visio diagrams if you wanted. But you could also create new models, new objects, extensions of that meta model, and then do the same mapping from the new Visio stencil. So there's no limitation in terms of that. Okay. Next one, it looks like a sophisticated application. Thank you. Should you have is it hard to manage, I think is the core question there. Should you have an application manager dedicated to the software or knowledge of Microsoft Office 365? I wouldn't say that you would need a dedicated manager purely for this. I would always sort of recommend having sort of one iServer 365 administrator or one sort of champion within the tool, and it definitely is a benefit if they're already familiar with Office 365 and SharePoint design and things like this. But I don't think that you need to go as far as for them needing a dedicated role or needing sort of dedicated technical training, because a lot of even the meta model configuration and a lot of the underlying stuff for the 365 doesn't require scripting, doesn't require coding or anything like this. It is meant to be point and click. It's meant to be very easy to use here. So hopefully that answers that question. Big advantage is that you can easily deploy knowledge. A big advantage is that you can easily deploy knowledge management features using tooling familiar to a broad audience, using your architecture models as metadata. Yes, I would agree with that. I'm not sure if there's a particular question in there. Will, maybe you could question. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying that I think the most of the rest of them have already been answered.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Well, you of course will have our contact details as well, so do not hesitate to reach out to us if indeed you want a direct one-to-one session, or if you'd like to know more about the tool, or if any questions come up after today. That is, we're perfectly happy to answer those. And I think that is us perfectly to time, if I'm not mistaken.
That's you're absolutely right. Perfectly in time. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, William, for the presentation. It's always a privilege to welcome you at the event, and of course we hope again to meet in 2 years' time, but then in person. Mm-hmm. Although this works out pretty fine as well. If there are any additional questions for Paul or William, just let us know. Then we will bring you in touch with Orbus, and we will ensure the contact is established. We will now have a lunch break, and we will continue at 1 o'clock with the next presentation. And the next presentation is from EA Solutions. So hereby we wish you all a good lunch, maybe have a walk, and see you again at 1 o'clock.